I've been listening to Brian Burns and the Brutal Truth about sales and selling throughout the past 6 months or so, which it kind of coincides with the time that I got back into listening to podcasts. But anyway, so Brian Burns, The Brutal Truth of Sales and Selling. I started listening to his podcast about 6 months ago. I was amazed at looking at the title, The Brutal Truth. It's not a lot of fluff. It's not a lot of rah-rah motivational stuff. The key thing is that, Brian's speaking from what I anticipate is real world sales experience, and the challenges that a lot of the salespeople that I talk to, who are my reseller partners, have, are the types of problems that Brian speaks to in his podcast. Brian, I don't know, do you want to, I know it's not the real elaborate introduction, but any thoughts about what I just said? Because it is the brutal truth.
Yeah. So basically, I started the podcast having been a sales guy for 25 years. And I didn't see anything out there that was really talking about real honest selling. And all the people that were out there never sold. And I don't know how they came up with this stuff. It's mostly the stuff from the door-to-door days. And I just like to share what I've seen work. And having been both a sales guy and a sales manager and back and forth several times, I wanted to share good selling practices and helping people sell more and make more money.
Excellent. So, I mean, how did you come up with the brutal truth? I like that title.
Well, there was just so much BS out there, and all these books that were really popular at the time. And I go, okay, these people have never sold. They come up with some research, which is, who knows if they made it up. Most likely they made it up, or they researched their clients, and it's not really scientific. It's really marketing. And I just thought it was BS. So I like the brutal truth, the straightforward, this is what works, this is why it works, and this is why other stuff doesn't work.
That's excellent. Well, so from this point on, I put together some questions that I wanted to go over with you, or at least I want to ask you. The questions that I chose were questions that I know that the partners that I work with face. Like for instance, when a customer says, just send me a quote, or, things like that. So from this point on, I've picked a few different of the podcasts, and I'm going to actually share which podcast it is. So those people who are listening can actually, go to that podcast and specifically download it. Of course, my suggestion would be to subscribe, like subscribe in general, but this will give you a taste, if nothing else. So, there was a podcast you did on May 22nd, 2014, and it was how to handle the let me think about it objection. You gave some great techniques, or great prevention techniques, I guess, from getting that objection. But can you expand on some of the things maybe you did in that podcast? One of the things that you mentioned about was mismatching. And that was something that kind of, I guess I thought about it, but never heard of a term that way. But
yeah, so basically you want to prevent that, first of all, getting to the let me think about it, because what they really want is time, or they just don't want an answer right now. And if you're selling something that's in the complex sale where it's more than one sales call, if it's a single sales call, let me think about it means I'm not buying it. So you got to engage people. And the mismatching is basically agreeing with them. I go, you need to think about it, but let's pick a time. What do you think? A week? Is a week a good amount of time to think about it? Talk to people, do your research, do your analysis. We'll get together next Friday at 9:30. And if they don't agree with that, then you have to basically use other techniques. What I recommend is, let's say they like the color, just using color as an example. It could be the size, the amount, whatever it is. You say, if they like the color, you say, oh, is it the color? That way they'll immediately respond, no, it's not the color. It's really the price I'm worried about. You try and get the conversation going again, instead of leaving there not knowing what the real issue is. So right. If you're selling a house and they love the location, but it doesn't have a pool or something, you say, well, you don't like this location. Is that it? You can be honest with me. They go, no, we love the location. It's really that there's no swimming pool, or there's no fifth bedroom or something like that.
Yeah. So you're thinking that, during that mismatch, if you say something that you actually know that they do like, and that next thing out of their mouth likely will be the truth. Yeah.
So what this is, typically, it's just a stalling tactic, or I've had enough for one day tactic. But what you can't leave with is not knowing what the real issue is. Because if you know it's a swimming pool or the color or whatever, then you can show them something else and you get the process going again, instead of you not knowing what they want and they not knowing what they want.
Right. Then you part ways and you're still not sure. I got it.
Yeah.
So the next question I'm going to ask, and in the podcast, you said that was actually the question that you probably get the most from anyone. And maybe I should have started off the podcast or that started off this blab with that question. But it's the, how to best handle the pricing objection or the pricing question. It was from a podcast in August 12th of 2014. I love the idea of, you mentioned about, making a draft and putting a draft proposal and putting a non-standard, expiration date on it. But it's a pricing objection question.
Well, yeah, we always hear pricing, but pricing may be a real objection, or it may be just you're commoditized. And every client wants to commoditize us, because if they don't, then they lose leverage and value. So what they want to do is, well, just constantly ask me what the price is. And I get this all the time. People want to be on the podcast. Is there a price associated with it? Everyone's scared to death of spending money. But the way to handle it is to keep the sales process going. And let's face it, usually the person who's asking for the pricing has no purchase authority. They have influence. They're part of the process. They may be the requester, but it's not their money, especially in B2B sales. It's not their money. So the price is irrelevant until you get to the people who really have the authority there. And the way to handle it a lot of times is, I'll put it into an email, put it into as least official mode possible. Why? Because then they have to come back to you. Okay. If you give them a formal quote, everyone does this, every junior person. Oh, here's the formal quote with no expiration date on it, or an expiration date 30 days from now, and might be list price, doesn't matter. And all of a sudden, the client now has everything they need, and they don't need you anymore. And all of a sudden, what do? Oh, you call them 3 times a week, just checking in. Any questions on the quote? And the quote is still in their email box. They've done nothing with it. And you think they're doing something with it. So you really have to, I always put draft on everything, put an expiration date that's ridiculously short, put ranges on the price, put a bunch of items, never put a total, put like discount to be determined, things like this that get people like, well, this isn't a quote. And I go, well, we're not really there yet. Can you introduce me to the person who has the authority to approve this? Or don't you want to test it first? Or I'm not really sure I'm giving you the right thing. You've got to engage them so that you get the real questions, the real issues resolved. You do not want to be commoditized. Even if you have something that everyone else sells, you say, well, let's get to the point of when you are purchasing it. And then we'll get you the best price we can. That way, you're the one who's the last one in.
Well, right. I was going to say, I know that's a challenge in our industry where it has become commoditized to a certain extent. And obviously, there's strategies that the company I work for is doing to try to kind of eliminate that, or take the commodity out of the equation. But it's still, people are used to, purchasing guys are used to boiling it down. What's the least common denominator price? And they may not be comparing apples with apples, maybe apples and oranges, but I really like the strategy that you said. And one of the things you said in the podcast was to, plan for that question up front, so you know how to respond to it. Don't try to respond to it on the fly without thinking about it, because
in sales, you're always going to get the, let me think about it,
a polished response.
Give me a price quote, a proposal. You're going to get those things. So if you can think about what's the best way to handle it with what you sell, because, I don't know what everybody sells. I know what I've sold, and I've always gotten those things. And I've always seen people not prepare for them, or just run back to the office and email a quote that nobody ever opens. And you really lost the sales process there. You no longer have a sales process. You kind of show up, throw up, send a quote in, and hope for the best. And it works 1 out of 20 times maybe, and you think, you're lucky or whatever. You're not really in control of the process.
Right, right. Well, I guess the good thing, speaking of going back to what you said at the very beginning, one of the first thing you said about this specific question was, you put draft on it, you
They've
put a
looked
price
at it,
range
yeah.
on there, and at that point, if they're calling you, they've at least looked at it. They've
Yeah.
seen, hey, there's a price range. Hey, they've seen that it says draft. At least they looked at it. That's actually, I didn't even think about that at the time during listening to your podcast, but I thought about it now as you just kind of were answering that question right there. So let's move on to the next one. So the next one was actually from the March 20th, 2015 podcast. How to always get a call back. No more radio silence. You made an analogy in the podcast about about getting sick, actually. And I don't know if you remember that or not, but it's better. It's easier to prepare or to prevent getting sick.
Right.
Then once you get sick, it's easier to prepare getting sick than once you get sick to heal yourself. So it's easier to prevent the no more radio silence.
Well, that's it. Because in sales, it is prevention perfection.
Than one after it already happens.
And unfortunately, we're stimulus response creatures, and we really don't work well with prevention. We work well with reacting to things. And guess what? If you're in the complex sale, you're always going to have this follow-up. And I say, forget follow-up. Pretend you cannot follow up. Meaning that if you don't have a scheduled event in the future, you really don't have a sales process. You're reacting. You're looking inside the white or the black box trying to guess what's going to happen. And the thing is, the client goes, well, there's stimulus response too. They're not going to do anything until they have to. And then usually it's too late. They want to buy as little as possible. Radio silence is caused by there's no reason to act. What you have to do is come up with a reason to act. And managers kind of push us in the wrong direction. They want us to show up, get as far as we can in the sales process in that one day as we can. That's the absolute wrong thing to do. Why? Because they're not going to buy that day. So you basically getting into a situation where you show up, you present, you demo, and then you propose, and then you follow up infinitely until you either give up or they give up. Instead, why don't you kind of come up with what are the milestones and baby step it through the process and kind of make sure it's a dance where you have a scheduled event. It can be a week, it can be 2 weeks, it can be a month, but it's scheduled, meaning that it's on their calendar. And if they don't make that commitment, you know that something's broken, that they've lost interest, or something's become more important, as opposed to this follow-up, which they will only do if there's something in it for them. So you have to make sure that there's something in it for them, which requires you to think and prevent that from happening instead of, I use the getting sick, type 2 diabetes, where that's completely caused by diet and exercise. The donuts, the sugar, and not moving. So it's really simple to prevent. Don't eat the donuts and move. Trying to correct it through gastric bypass and drugs and all this stuff is very painful, expensive, and takes a lot of time. Very easy to prevent, very hard to recover from.
In that podcast, there was a few things that you said. I'm trying to see here. Oh, one thing to get re-engaged if there is radio silence. One of the things you mentioned was, bringing to use the statement, things have changed or something to that effect. I don't know if you remember that or not, but things have changed. It gives you a reason, especially if you're going to the voicemail.
Hey, I got to get back in touch with you. Things have changed. Let me fill you in. And if they don't care, well, what you got to do is come up with a reason. And too many of us, we leave the sales call thinking it's going to happen. And the client may want it to happen, but as soon as they get a little bump in the road or distraction or shiny object comes about, they move on to something else and it doesn't happen. You have to come up with these milestones. And if you lose track, you have to be creative with things like things have changed. I got to fill you in. And at least the curiosity will get them to at least talk to you instead of just, hoping to take them to dinner or a ball game or something. Right.
That's a good point. Let's move on to the next question. So this is one of the challenges that I've seen with some of the people that I work with, some of the reseller partners I work with is, because they talk about, they have their company, there's competitors in this industry. Some of the competitors are in the same town. Some of the competitors do very much what they do as an organization. At least that's the perception of the end user customer, put it that way, even though there may be differences, but the customer thinks, again, almost like commoditizing the salesperson or commoditizing the company. But one of the things on the November 7th, 2015 podcast was 5 ways to differentiate yourself in sales. You mentioned about there's a lot of different noise out there.
Yeah,
you're trying to differentiate yourself as a salesperson from that.
Because
noise.
everybody asks the same questions. How do I get a call back? How do I handle these objections? And the problem is you're acting like a salesperson. That's key number 1. And guess what? Nobody finds value in a salesperson anymore. Nobody needs someone's hand to shake or take them out for coffee or lunch. You have to differentiate yourself by not acting like a salesperson, bringing value. And I came up with 5 of them. I'm glad you listed them here because my memory isn't what it used to be. The building of trust, doing what you say. How many salespeople have we met in our lives who do not do half of what they say, right? Yeah, they don't follow through on their responsibilities. They're supposed to get you a sample. They're supposed to get you a reference. They're supposed to do this. And they don't do that, but they get you a quote and they hound you to get an order or something out of you. And how many salespeople actually bring something of value, not just a sample, but maybe they bring a book or an article or a reference or something of value that the client sees. And I get this all the time, especially in like pharmaceutical or medical sales where they're selling to doctors and they can't get in to see people. Well, guess what? The 5 other guys have come in that day before you asking for the same thing. You got to become creative. And it's like, well, how do I become creative? By being creative, right? I don't know what's going to work in your particular market, but you have to be more creative because everybody else is doing the same stupid things, right? They're sending LinkedIn connections and then asking for a favor to get on the phone for 5 minutes, or they're spamming you to death. And that isn't working because everyone does it. As soon as everyone starts doing it, you have to find something else to do, something to be more creative. And so you just got to show that you're different and not just talk about how you're different. Really showing up. Go ahead.
Right. No, go ahead.
Okay. It's really showing how
we had a
you're
bit of a
different,
technical
adding value, not just hounding
them,
them, listening to what they really care about, the problems that they're facing, what's really in their way, what they really want to learn about. It might just be industry knowledge. It might be just networking and community knowledge. It might be helping them hire somebody or them learning about what their competitors are doing, something of value to them. And then being able to leverage quid pro quo, basically a give and take, not just be a taker, but constantly giving, but also asking for something in return. Don't just give. A lot of people just say give, give, give. And the problem is once you do that, people don't see value to it because they just assume it's going to happen.
Well, and they feel like
if you can't get anything
in the
back,
same deal, I've got to keep giving to keep their interest.
What do you really have?
Right. Yeah, well, I think that number 1, the first one you mentioned about don't act like a salesperson, especially nowadays with the internet out there. I mean,
just frozen.
And, there's all these stories and all these metrics about the buyer's journey and at what.
Keep going.
I can hear you though. Yeah. It could be, I don't know if it's my network, your network, or Blab, one of the two, but at least the audio is so good. So, but anyway, so we obviously with the internet and so forth, everybody, there's, all these metrics out there that talk about, at what point during the buyer's journey does a person, engage a sales rep. So again, don't act like a sales rep. And you talk about, give. Actually, one of the things I did a similar Blab session with Jack Kozakowski not too long ago, and he came up with this, look at your outbox of your email. Look at your outbox and how many times do you send a customer an email where you're not asking for something? He says, 3 gives to 1 ask, something that, so that, something to that example. So, you said, don't just always just give, make sure you ask. So, using Jack's theories, 3 gives to 1 ask. So anyways, I guess let's move on. So from the podcast, let's see, dated December 8th, 2015, Stop Cold Calling with Jill Rowley. I started following Jill Rowley, after I had not heard of her. I started following her on LinkedIn and Twitter after your podcast. But one of the things she talks about is, utilizing social selling. And that was actually the basis of my discussion with Jack Kozakowski a month or so ago. But, why do you think it is that many reps are so hesitant to utilize
I think
social media as a tool?
It's a chicken and egg thing where they may not see a lot of their market on social yet. And it's kind of ironic that both Jill and Jack were in the same space as marketing automation. And that space is on social.
Right.
They're marketing people. So that social works extremely well for them. For a lot of us, social works okay. And I think we've been too conditioned that if we're not on the phone or in front of somebody, that we can't be really selling. And I think we need to break selling down into little baby steps where it's finding people, connecting with them, and then engaging them in a conversation that's about something that we're both interested in that could evolve into a sales situation. Because a lot of sales is just qualifying, because you don't want to spend time on somebody who has no interest in buying what you're selling. But they may be able to help you network.
Right.
And you got to start thinking of the internet as a 24/7 trade show where you've got to show up, connect with people, talk with people, point each other in the right direction, and help each other out. Instead of looking at it as, just surfing and looking at cat videos and a email server.
Right. That's it. I like that. I was gonna say, one of the things that I've shared and Jack shared about it, because Jack and I compared different, my definition, his definition of social selling. And the funny thing was that even though some of the verbiage and the wording was different, but the meat of it was the same, was basically building a rapport with someone online. Maybe not via cold calling specifically, but building a rapport with someone online using whatever tools, in this case, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it may be. But then, taking that conversation offline, that's where the true business discussion becomes. That's where true business discussion starts. But you got to build that rapport, build that trust.
Right. Let's face it, the phone is basically the internet now too, with voice over IP. It's all right. It's just different ways of doing it. And, face to face will always be the best, but you don't want to spend all that time and money until they're qualified, interested, and it's worth, getting on a plane or getting in your car and spending a couple hours to go talk to them. It used to be you just did that. You just drove around and knocked on the doors and trying to find somebody to talk to. Today, you find them online, you try and find the right person, you try and find the right message, and then you try and connect with them online first, either through email, LinkedIn, Twitter, or phone. And then once they're qualified, then you want to go talk to them face to face.
Sure. Hey, you mentioned the old days, and then with a whole cup holder full of quarters too for the payphone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you couldn't afford to use the cell phone in your car. It was like $10 a minute.
I was traveling in a certain city up in Michigan 2 months ago, and I actually saw a payphone at a gas station. I took a picture of it. I had not seen a payphone in years. I just I don't know why I mentioned that, but it doesn't apply to anything we're talking about today. But it was humorous. Are you okay on time? I've got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So there was a podcast you did very recently. This is from the end of January, January 30th, 2016. But it was Unwritten Rules of Sales and Selling. And this one really caught my attention just because, you related 3 specific ideas back to 3 real world types of situations that most everyone can relate to in some form or fashion. I don't know if you want me to refresh your memory on,
Yeah, we can take whichever
what
one
the situations
resonated
were,
with
but
you, because I've got a lot of great feedback on that episode, because it wasn't selling a product. It was trying to get people to do something that would dramatically help you.
right. Well, there was point number two, and it kind of relates to the cold calling or stop cold calling thing, building rapport. Point number two was, a college bound teen who has great grades, but there's obviously many other applicants who are trying to get into the same college. How maybe what's a strategy for that one?
Yeah, so I've got infinite number of friends and relatives who are in that stage in the last couple of years, and everyone's going to face it, and if every parent's going to face it. Certainly, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford your kid to go to a school, and let's say they did really well in school, they worked their butt off for 12 years. They're naturally smart. They worked hard. They got great grades, they got great SAT scores. They played sports. They contributed to the community, and they want to go to a A-level school, the best school they can. Of course they do, right? And the official route is to fill out the application, submit the tests. But the problem, obviously, is that there's only so many seats in that school. Now, all of a sudden now what do you do? Because let's say A-level school, there's 1,000 seats, 100,000 people apply, 80,000 are qualified. Okay, so 79,000 kids are going to get rejected. How do you differentiate yourself? So it goes back to don't act like a robot submitting a form. How can you connect with those people? Maybe you got to start thinking about it a couple years in advance about following those professors, following people who are at that school online. They all publish. It's publish or perish in the university. They have to have a name out. And guess what? No one reads that stuff. It's like sales blogs. Everyone writes one and no one reads one.
I was just wondering about that with my YouTube channel. Nope, maybe nobody watches it. I publish it. Maybe nobody watches it.
I'll teach you how to get them to watch it if you'd like. But
perfect.
So basically, what I just came up with this at a party. I go, and I think I overheard somebody else, so I don't want to take credit for it. It's like all these professors publish, very few ever get comments or feedback. You as a high school student want to go to that school and study with those professors, find out what they published, comment on it, contact them, ask questions, build a relationship with those people at those schools you want to go to, because all of a sudden you go from student number 70,864 to a human being. You are now no longer just an applicant. And all of a sudden, guess what? The real world does not work off of an algorithm. Here's the secret to life. It's all people. And people control everything. And yeah, we watch like Billionaires on that show on Showtime, where people just make up call and they put a building there. But none of us can afford to put a building there. And we can barely afford to send the kid to school there. But it's humans, and people want to help each other out, and they want to help each other out who help them. And it seems so mysterious, but so simple and obvious. It's, what's that? How to win friends and influence people. It's counterintuitive, and we don't want to believe it because we want to believe that there is a meritocracy. But what justifies the meritocracy is what I'm trying to explain to people. Right. Is the real meritocracy is typically based off of who knows who and who's helping who, and how you define that is, different in every environment.
So that's an unwritten rule. An unwritten rule was, again, this applies to sales, but in the example you shared was, your kid wants to go to college. The college has too many applicants, and you're trying to stand out. So, the example was, maybe follow one of the professors online, maybe read some of their work, comment on some of their work. And at that point, that professor doesn't have the ability to say, yes, you're approved, but he can most likely influence, right? I mean, that's
certainly tell you how the system works.
Yeah.
Because they probably have lunch with the people who control the system. And you go, you go from unknown to known, and you express your interest. You go on the campus visit. They introduce you to the people, and all of a sudden they remember you. And let's face it, out of that 79,000 that don't get accepted, how much real difference is there? Right.
Right.
You're really looking for that tiny, tiny little bit of difference, because another law that I have is the best product does not win. We want to think that there's a meritocracy, but that's BS. You know, do you really think the Kardashians are the most interesting and entertaining family in the world? Do you?
Yeah. Well, I don't, but okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they've got the bandwidth. So you got to, that's what the meritocracy has given us.
Right, right. If you don't mind, before we move on to the last question, just one more. There was 3 specific situations that you commented on during that podcast. One was the college-bound teen and how that relates to that same kind of activity or out-of-the-box maverick thinking, can lead to sales or applies to sales. But also there's one other one you used about a woman who has a brain tumor and she needs a surgery, but the doctor that she wants to go to is the best in the country, in your story, isn't accepting new patients. And again, this definitely applies to sales too, because you can't always get in with your end user customer that you're trying to get in with.
Right. You can't. And what's the direct route? And how many salespeople do this? I'll call the CEO. Yeah. And you get the secretary, and the secretary puts it a voicemail, or, I'll let him know. Right. And it never works. And this is basically what my friend was doing. His wife had a brain tumor. The doctor, surgeon who specializes it was Johns Hopkins, and he went the official route, got stonewalled. And I had actually a friend who was a roommate with somebody who works at Johns Hopkins that I had met at a party. So we're talking like 3 levels removed.
Right.
But during that coffee meeting, I am emailing and texting people trying to get the contact. And the guy who worked at Johns Hopkins remembered me. I call him and he goes, well, I know that doctor. He works right down the hall. Let me see what I can do. So it took 35, 40 minutes, but it's all about networking. And this guy was handicapped. And a lot of people at the party ignored him. And I talked to him.
Oh, right.
So he remembered me as somebody who wasn't a dick, who didn't just overlook him.
Right. You're being authentic. Yeah.
Yeah. He remembered me as a human being, as somebody who was worth talking to.
Right. Exactly. I found, those 3 examples very fascinating because again, they're non-sales examples, but they totally relate to sales. So if that doesn't get one of the people watching this to listen to that podcast, I don't know what will,
Yeah, because it was creative. And my friend, who was a sales guy, didn't think about it. Maybe he was emotionally wrapped up.
He was
and
too close, right?
Yeah. But, he could have called that doctor's secretary 1,000 times and it wouldn't have happened. That, remember the first Wall Street movie where you call the secretary? Maybe on his birthday it would have worked. But his wife may not still have been here today.
All right. Well, okay, that's good. So then the last question that I have for you is from the February 20th podcast. And it talks about icebreakers, how to automate icebreakers. And you actually suggested a new tool called Owler, Owler. And I'm using Owler now as a result of listening to your podcast. And actually, I just shared it with some of my coworkers yesterday and then today, and I actually sent them the feed that I got this morning. It mentioned stuff about my company that we didn't even know about, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't even that. It was just other public information that Owler has kind of what's the word? Aggregated into one place, really.
Yeah,
so,
curated.
Yeah, so curated. Yeah. So basically, how to automate icebreaker. So, I'm sure most people watching could get a feel for what an icebreaker is, but why don't you just say what an icebreaker is first, and then maybe comment on that podcast.
Sure. An icebreaker, it's nothing new. We've all done it. Imagine in the physical world, you're at a party and you don't know somebody, and let's say you even want to network and sell at a party. Say you sell real estate or personal training. And I've seen people do both of those really bad. If you want to do that really well, what do? You don't go up and hand them your card and talk about personal training or insurance or whatever, because the card gets thrown away. What do? You talk about the music, the food, the weather, the kids. That's an icebreaker. That's how you start a conversation. And guess what happens? Eventually, they tell you what they do, and then they ask you what you do.
Right.
Okay. Now, why don't we do that in sales? Instead of, okay, here's my great product. Here's the 3 benefits of it. Here's the 3 problems we solve. What are you experiencing? That's the old school. And people are like, oh, I get 5 of these a day or 5 of these an hour. How about if you just broke the ice? You talk about a third thing that we both have in common, that we both have interest in. Now, in business, it's not the weather, the music, the food, the kids. It's probably something in the industry that is changing. Things have changed.
Right.
Wait, things have changed? I just got comfortable the way things were. Now you can start talking about, oh, the new flux capacitor has 10 times the capacity. And you're like, well, how's that impact my business? It's basically something that you can talk about. Like you and I today are talking about sales or talking on Blab, something that's new to me. Things have changed. I didn't know about this. I got to learn this. Right. And eventually we'll talk about what I do and what you do. And if it's qualified that we can help each other, we will. And now you have rapport with somebody, and they'll at least introduce you to the surgeon that can save your wife's life. Right. It's networking in the same old fashioned way we've always done it. But today we're, automate it with spam and cold calling and, pump and dump. And it's not as effective as it used to be, because I think we got lost on the phone because we didn't get many phone calls in the 90s, and we'd pick up the phone. And before we had voicemail, probably in the late 80s, but we had to pick up the phone because if we didn't, we never knew who it was. Once we got voicemail, we had an automatic screen. Now we have caller ID, so we don't even have to check the voicemail. And now we know if they don't call us on our cell phone, they don't know who we are. And so the technology is putting this distance between us. So we have to, I say, use the technology to pull us together again. And that's what an icebreaker is. Something that we both are interested in that's not me pitching a product or immediately going into qualification.
Okay. All right. Got it. So then if you, kind of expand that out to Owler, one of the things that does that gives you some icebreaker topics potentially that are, business related. Following, I follow my company now. I follow my competitors. Yep. I follow some of my, my reseller organizations, and I see when they post a blog. I see when maybe they make a certain business decision. They've acquired a company or investing so much somewhere else, or something like that. So,
right, you see changes in leadership, changes in stock price, dramatic changes in stock price, new product releases. Their blog tells you what they care about.
Right.
I follow my whole ecosystem.
Yep. Ecosystem. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in my ecosystem, like when LinkedIn's stock price gets cut in half, everyone wants to talk about it, right? Everyone's got an opinion about it. And all of a sudden, that's an icebreaker. The ice is now broken. You and I are talking. Right.
Well, and I guess another term could be, with Owler, again, OWLER, this tool, that could be a trigger event. There's a whole, I got a whole screen of trigger events. If I was calling on these companies, it gives me something to talk about.
Something to talk about that they're interested in, that's not about the product. Doesn't mean you can't quickly move into a sales conversation, but it's just something that, how many people, oh, your stock price just doubled? Everyone wants to tell you why. It's all about this thing I came up with. Typically there's something, you can find it right there, and it's automated and it's free. So it's like Google alerts on steroids, all focused on what you care about.
Right. Well, that's excellent. I definitely appreciate your time, Brian. Is there anything that, I was going to, kind of wrap up by saying, are you still do the free, you still give away the free, that
Yeah, I do.
subscribe to your podcast and write a review? I mean,
yeah. So as a reward for anybody who takes the time to post a review on iTunes for the podcast, I gift my Audible book to them. So all you need to do is write the review in iTunes, take a picture of it, email it to me. My email's in the show notes of the podcast, and I plug your email into Audible, and you get the free book. So it really takes 2 minutes.
So for those of you who are watching, Brian's written a book on on sales strategies and so forth. Go check out the podcast that I started again that I mentioned. I started listening to about 6 months ago. The topics or the questions that I asked him today were directly from the podcast. Each one question for each podcast. That was the format we did today. So do go check out the podcast. I find it's very helpful. Again, no rah. It's just the brutal truth, really.
Great, thanks.
And
Mark.
then, I was saying, and then those who are fans of what was the movie, the Tom Cruise movie? You got the Few Good Men,
Oh yeah, A Few Good Expenses.
Yeah.
The end of it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. There's a couple movie references in there, but the beginning and the end, which are good, very good stuff.